Hey guys, I'm Angela and welcome back to Hobby Night. This week I was going to be painting Sigvald, but he stood me up twice in a row. And so instead I decided to pick up my little black book and find a new date for this week. And in my black book, I found Abaddon the Despoiler. And I think he's going to make for a very fun time. I wanted to give a quick apology for the lack of painting video last week. We had a small kitty emergency that is now taken care of, and he is doing much better, so I'm very excited for that. But let's go ahead and move on to talking about Abaddon the Despoiler, the big chunky boy himself, because my goodness, I have had him for a long time and I've really been wanting to paint him, and now is the time. But because he is such a large figure, I'm going to be doing this in two parts. For this first part, I'm going to be working on a couple of his accessories, including the cloak, as well as that glorious trophy rack he has on his back, and the base. For part two, which will come out next week, I'm going to be working on Abaddon himself and getting all of that glorious armor painted up. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get working on the base and accessories. I started by priming him using a rattle can of gray Seer, which is kind of my go-to color these days. But when I was doing this, I wanted to keep him in pieces to make painting him later a lot easier. So as you can see, I'm taking him apart using a little bit of blue tack and cleaning that off so that I can get to painting. Now, while I spray primed most of Abaddon, there was one piece because it was just super tiny and I didn't feel comfortable like priming it separately because I was afraid I'd either lose it or over prime and end up losing some of the details. I decided to keep that piece separate and just go ahead and hand prime that with a brush and a pot of gray Seer paint. Before I got started with this painting project, I sort of planned Abaddon out a little bit because I wanted to make sure that I had some good colors and cohesion throughout the piece. And one of the major things that I wanted to think about was the ground color. So when I was thinking about it, I ultimately decided to go with a gray tone using Astrogranite. And to complement that, I'm going to be putting Basilicanum Gray over all of the textured groundwork that is on the actual modeled piece that comes with his kit. Now, I like to start with my dark colors first, hence kind of why I went with the Basilicanum Gray. Now we're going to move on to Black Templar. This color is going to be used primarily on the joints of the Space Marine that Abaddon is standing on, as well as the armor of his trophy rack and any of the pieces that we want to be metallic later, because black tends to work as a good base color for metallics to go over top. It doesn't allow as much of that lighter base color, the gray Seer that we put down previously, to shine through, and then we just get a better opaque finish on our metallics and we don't have to layer it as much, which means we don't lose as much detail. I really like this process and it works super well for me. I do forget at this point to actually do the trim on that Space Marine that he's standing on, my little Hobby Knight that Abaddon has slain, because of course I'm gonna make it a Hobby Knight that he's murdered and everything. It's my custom chapter for the channel, of course I have to represent him. I'm gonna get to that trim later, I did forget it at this stage, but if you ever do that, feel free to go back and just touch up what you forgot. Now that I have all of the metallic pieces prepped, I'm going to actually put that metallic paint on it, and we're going to start with some Leadbealcher. I'm going to be using actually a number of metallics on Abaddon, and this one in particular is going to be used for some of the shell casings, like the larger ones that are on the base, to sort of help differentiate them from what I'm doing with the smaller ones later. I also want to put this on the spikes that are on the trophy rack that he has, because, you know, he's got to have something sharp and iron to stab those heads through for them to rot on and turn into skulls and just decorate him gloriously. And we're also going to be putting it on the sconson of the torch that is on the ground in the actual, like that's shoved into the ground on his base, which actually is an Imperial torch, and I really wanted to make sure that it was definitively different from what I'm doing on Abaddon's trim, which we're going to get to here in a second. As I said, I wanted to keep Abaddon's trim metallics a little bit different from the Leadbealcher that we had done previously. So for that, I'm going to take a 1-part mix of Liborator Gold and Stormhost Silver and mix those together to create a very soft gold metallic that has a little bit of that silver tone in it that I really like. I did this on Kagra in a previous video, and I've actually done this on a number of my Black Legion miniatures that I've painted from like one of the kits that I got a long time ago, and it just works super well. I really like it in contrast to the black armor that they tend to wear, and it just, I really enjoy it. So that is what I'm going to be doing for the trim, and this is primarily going to be going on just that accessory piece right now. We'll be using a lot more of this in part 2 when we paint Abaddon himself. Oh, hey, didn't see you guys there. Well, while you're here, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video. This is going to be my one cleanup stage. I'm going to pull out a pot of gray Seer just to tidy up any of the places where I maybe got some blacks or metallics where I didn't want them. And then moving forward, we're going to go on to some bolder, brighter colors. Speaking of bold, bright, well, maybe not bright, but deep colors, we're going to move on now to Flesh Tearers Red. Now, this is one of my favorite contrast colors. I use it all of the time, and it is a Hobby Knight color. So of course we're going to be applying this to our Hobby Knight who is slain beneath Abaddon's feet, because I assume that they just went to like glorious combat, and it's an epic battle in my mind. I'm sad my boy didn't win, but on the same time, it's Abaddon, so I'm also okay with it. But we're not just going to be painting up my boy in red, we're also going to be painting up his cloak in this color, because I debated maybe doing Abaddon's cloak and Blood Angel's red just to maybe differentiate it a little bit. I didn't like the idea of it. I wanted that rich, deep, almost like velvety color that Flesh Tearers gives you, so we went ahead and put the red on the cloak as well, and ultimately I actually think it ties it in a little bit better, and I can't wait to see him like all done with those colors around him. Now, I didn't want him to have just fought the Hobby Knights, so on that helmet that we have on his base, we're going to pull out some Ultramarine blue and apply that to make it so that like maybe they were helping the Ultramarines, or maybe the Ultramarines were helping them, who knows? But it was a collaborative effort and they both failed. There's one more helmet that is unaccounted for, and that is the one that was on his trophy rack, and for that I decided to go with Dark Angel's green because I wanted to just have a representation of a number of different chapters, and while I don't really like the Ultramarines a super lot, I do like the Dark Angels, and I wanted to include them, and also green is one of my favorite colors. So I decided to make that one a Dark Angel. Now, I've used a couple of metallics already on Abaddon, including his base and his accessories and everything, but I didn't want to go with a full gold on the shell casings nor on the Hobby Knight himself, because he's got a bit of like gold filigree and like ornamentation on there. So instead, I decided to use Iyanden yellow, which is what I typically do. If you've watched a couple of my other videos where I've painted the Hobby Knights, I tend to use that as my gold substitute, and I really like it, normally. I then decided to put the same color on the wings that are on that like jump pack that's next to my dead boy, and this was a mistake. It was just a huge mistake. By the time it was finished drying and done, I was like, oh no, it looks like McDonald's French fries, and I had to change it. So we'll get to that in a bit, but for now, I've got some McDonald's fries for Abaddon to munch on right there on his base for him. Next, it's time to pull out some Skeleton Horde and start painting all those skulls on the base and his trophy rack. Now, I also am going to be using this color in one other key location on this miniature that normally I actually don't tend to use Skeleton Horde despite having recommended it for this use. I'm going to be putting it on the fur trim that's on his cloak cape thing. I debated doing a slightly more reddish flesh tone color on here to maybe tie it into that Flesh Tearers red color tone that I had already put down, but ultimately actually decided that the warmer layered color tone of Skeleton Horde, like when you put a couple of layers on it, so I think I did 3 or 4 layers of Skeleton Horde to get a little bit of a richer, deeper brown, that ended up working really well. It gave me a very natural but light, almost aged leather look to me, and it works really nice, and I'm very pleased with the results. I figured a fun way to add a bit more variety to his trophy rack would be applying some Magos purple to that Tyrannid skull that he's got shoved on there. And honestly, I think this works really, really well. It helps complement, I think, with the green of the Dark Angels, because I do like a green and purple mix, and it differentiates it from all of the more human skulls that he's also got on there. There was this random pesky cord that was hanging out, like sort of tucked into the gravel on the sculpted base. So for that, I pulled out Orc Flesh just to give it a bright, bold color, add another tone of green in there that wasn't as dark as the Dark Angels color we had used previously, and just to help it pop a little bit. I'm ready to start wrapping up the base. So for that, we're going to pull out my handy dandy Citadel texture tool and Astrogranite texture paint and start applying this to all of the exposed sections of the base that don't actually have that miniature portion stuck down to it. Not only am I going to be applying this over that area just to cover it and make it blend with everything, but I'm also going to be using the paint to hide the seam of where the miniature and paint meet, as well as to sort of start bleeding that paint up onto the base itself to sort of help blend those two textures. I found that Astrogranite tends to work really, really well to complement the sort of generic ground gravel pattern that GW likes to put onto its bases. And by blending it a little bit like this, you kind of smooth it out, make it even more seamless, and you get this really nice seamless cohesiveness amongst your base. And overall, it works super well. The other nice thing that I like about this color is if you want to do something more alien where you have it be tinted, say like green or red or blue or purple or pink or whatever, Astrogranite actually takes those shades really well. I've used Bieltan shade on it previously and it works beautifully. But for this one, we're not going to be doing quite so bold of a color. We're going to keep it fairly gray. All right, my texture paint is now drying, or is dried, and I want to fix the horrible, horrible yellow that is on the wings of the jump pack that is on the base. It just didn't work. So after doing a quick prime in Gray Seer, I apply some Apothecary white over top of it, and immediately I feel so much better about it. It looks cleaner, it looks brighter, it just fits, and it no longer looks like fries. I'm very happy. Now that the texture paint is completely dry, and honestly the Apothecary white is as well, I'm going to be applying Nuln Oil to pretty much everything on the base with the exception of the skulls or warmer color tones, except for the Hobby Knight. He's also going to get a wash in the Nuln Oil just because he's not actually in there anymore. His armor is clearly not being maintained, and there's probably been some rain and soot and all that stuff falling on him, so him being dirtied up works. This is a really, I haven't used Nuln Oil in a while actually, but I do like to dip back into it a few times because it is really nice as a just dark black shade over top a gray base. And that's kind of what I have here. Anything that didn't get a wash with Nuln Oil is now going to get a wash with Reikland's Flesh Shade. It is sort of my go-to light brown tone wash that I like to use, and it just works especially well on the skulls, and so I just tend to keep going back to it. I should try Agrath's Earth Shade though to vary it up sometimes. There are a couple of other good shades that GW makes and other places too, but Reikland's is just sort of my go-to now. Next, I wanted to further work on blending my gray tones and my texture paint into the actual basis texture. So for that, I'm going to pull out Dawnstone, which is a dry paint, and with a medium dry brush, basically get all of the gray portions on the base, except for the rocks. I don't want to hit too many of the actual protruding rocks on it very much because I want to have those be a little bit paler, basically just maintain that Basilicanum color, whereas the ground will get this Dawnstone and one other dry brush to help blend everything in and make it cohesive. The last dry brush color that I'm going to be applying to all of the gravel base portion is going to be Longbeard's Gray. This is quickly becoming sort of my go-to light highlight color for any whites or grays that I have on a miniature, and it works so well. It's very neutral, which I think is the reason that I keep gravitating toward it. It doesn't lean too blue or too yellow like some of the grays can. It's just very neutral gray, and it works really well. We're going to be applying this lighter than we did with the Dawnstone over pretty much everything, maybe emphasizing a few locations just to give us a little bit more variety and texture, but overall we want to keep it fairly even. Now, you might have noticed there's one thing that we haven't really touched on or talked about at all, and that is that glorious flame that is in that torch. So for that, I'm going to be using Blood Angel's Red. I decided after sort of a little bit of a debate on how I wanted to approach the flame to do it in a mix of contrast paint as well as your standard layer paints. So the Blood Angels is the first color we're putting down, and that's just giving me the bolder, richer red, the color that I'm wanting for the tips of the flame. The next color that I'm going to be using on the flame is Troll Slayer's Orange. We're going to be starting at the base of the flame and working our way out, not bringing this color to the full edge of the tips of the flame because we want to keep those red and as pure red as we can, but sort of bleeding this color in and gently gliding my brush along those raised edges to sort of get this cool effect to make it look like the flame is moving and has some variety going in it. For the final color for the flame, I wanted to actually go with a little bit of a richer ochre yellow color, and so for that I pulled out Averland Sunset. I debated doing something a little bit brighter and going like more of a canary yellow, but because I went with the Flesh Tearer's red, and I know that Abaddon is going to be mostly black armored and have darker color tones on him, I thought the super bright yellow might be a little too bright, and hence the ochre color. This actually works super well in my opinion. I love that sort of rich, almost muted flame color that you're getting out of it. And we basically do what we did with the orange. We start at the base of the flame and work our way towards the edge, not bringing this as far as we brought the orange and just sort of layering it to create that flame effect of it flickering and firing. And honestly, I don't paint flames very often, but I'm very pleased with how this one turned out. And here he is. Part 1 is done. His cloak looks great. His base looks great. I'm actually really, really happy with the base. Basing is one of the parts of miniature painting that I actually very much enjoy, but don't often spend a huge amount of time on. So whenever I get to work with some of these sculpted bases like what Abaddon has, it's always a lot of fun because I feel like I get to spend a little bit more time on them and play a bit more. And this one actually was great to paint. I felt like my blend of my textures worked really well. I'm very pleased with the consistency between the gray tone and how all of the porousness and textures and build up layers and everything works on the base. Plus, I think the skulls and the shell casings and the marines on there all stand out really nicely, which is exactly what I was going for. It also makes me happy to have all this color on him already because I know that going forward when I'm painting part 2, where I actually paint him, it's going to be a lot more dark colors, a lot of blacks, a lot of gold silver mixes and everything because it's mostly his armor that I'll be working on. So I was glad to be able to get these pops of color in. And then my flame looks so good. I'm very, very happy with it still. So if you guys have enjoyed this video, make sure to like the video, to subscribe to the channel for more, and I will see you guys next time where I will be painting the rest of Abaddon in part 2 next week. Thank you guys so much for watching. I have been Angela, you've been watching Hobby Night, and I'll see you next week. Bye guys!